And welcome back. Folks, Geriatric Gaming here, Shy Sox Fan 11, welcoming you back to another video. This time we're going to talk about Hex Perks. We're going to talk about what they are, what they do, and why they could probably use a little bit of help. We're going to take a look at our Piggy's Perks. If you've watched our videos, you hear that we do a lot of griping, I guess, about Hex Perks, at least as far as where our totems are located. And this would be a good time to take a look and see exactly what Hex Perks there are and why they are worth running and why they're not. I'm going to give a rating from 0 stars to 5 stars on all these Hex Perks as we take a look at them, and we'll see exactly what they are and what they do and if you should be running them and why. First off is Hex Blood Favor. That's going to be a perk from the Blight. And what Hex Favor does is whenever you hit a survivor with a basic attack, any pallets within 16 meters of your location are held in place and blocked for 15 seconds and cannot be pulled down. This also has a cooldown of 40 seconds. This is arguably one of the worst hexes of the entire game and pretty much useless to run. I give it a big fat 0 stars out of 5. The problems are multiple here. You have to A, hit a survivor with a basic attack. B, the pallets are only within 16 meters of your location. And C, the cooldown is 40 whole seconds. This is one of those perks that even if it wasn't a hex, might not be worth running. A survivor is going to get some distance off your basic attack while you have your cooldown and get their speed burst. If they're within 16 meters of a pallet, then perhaps you might get some value out of it. But once the survivor realizes you're running this perk, survivors will quickly adapt and not try to go to loops with pallets or just go to a different loop. 16 meters is a very, very small area. So the chances that you're going to be within distance of a pallet that hasn't been dropped to begin with to even have it take advantage of is going to be slim. And plus you have then a cooldown of 40 seconds. If they get to another loop with another pallet in it, then that pallet not only won't be blocked, but if you hit them again or hit a different survivor, that pallet won't be blocked due to the huge cooldown. This is one of those perks that if it didn't have the cooldown, it might be more useful in the course of a game, because then you'd be able to at some point find a survivor where they basically are in the dead zone except for the one pallet in the area, and you'll be able to maybe get a hit on them. But even then, I would question whether or not this would be worth running. As is, only a couple killers I think that can really benefit by pallets being blocked could use this. Maybe someone like a Bubba perhaps, but honestly I rarely see it run. And the worst part about it is it's not very effective, and it's a hex perk, so the odds that it's going to stay up in game to even give you value are going to be slim to none to begin with. Not worth a perk slot. Again, a 0 star out of 5. Moving along, Hex Crowd Control. This is a trickster perk. With the Hex Crowd Control, the entity will block a window for 20 seconds after a survivor performs a rushed vault through it. This is a better perk. I would give this one a 2 out of 5. It's still not tremendously good. This will block a window when the survivor rushes through it. So think of it as a bamboozle, but the survivor is dictating whatever the windows are. This can help you out. If you're chasing somebody, you're around a loop. Let's say they're at Killer Shack. They go through the window with a vault. Crowd Control will block it as if you had bamboozled it, and all of a sudden that loop is far less safe, and the survivor is going to have to think about going to another one, and this is going to persist. It's not going to be an action that's going to have a cooldown where when they go through another window, perhaps at a different loop, it's not going to get blocked. No, the entity is just going to keep on blocking windows that they're vaulting through. Again, this is kind of like bamboozle, except the survivor is dictating what windows this happens with, and it can happen to more than one at a time, unlike bamboozle, which will just occur on whatever the last window you went through was. That being said, bamboozle is probably just a better perk. And again, it would work seemingly a perk like this on with certain killers, like, again, let's say a Bubba, that really benefits by windows being blocked and reducing the areas that somebody can get away from them. Myers might be another killer that this perk could work well on. But once again, the biggest problem with this is it's a Hex perk, and we're going to be saying this a lot. It's better than Blood Favor for certain, but even so, the fact that it could be broken 10, 15 seconds into a match, that right there means that it's going to have a little bit of that drawback. And while it does have some benefit to it, again, I would rank it somewhere in that mediocre perk range, 2 out of 5 stars. And again, not one that I would run on most killers, only one I would run situationally with some. Let's move on. We have now some good hexes coming up. Hex Devour Hope. This is one of the best hexes in the game. I think the second best hex in the game, and I would give it a strong 4 out of 5 star rating on this. And Devour Hope's biggest strength is the fact that survivors don't know it's in play until it's too late in many instances. So what does it do? Whenever a survivor is rescued from a hook and you're at least 24 meters away as the killer, Devour Hope will get a token. With 2 tokens, you get a 5% haste status effect 10 seconds after hooking a survivor for a duration of 10 seconds. Once you get to 3 tokens, however, the survivors will all be exposed, and one shot down, if you can get it to 5 tokens, then you can Mori those survivors. Doesn't matter whether you've hooked them or not. It does not follow the normal Mori limitations that you have, where you have to hook somebody twice if you use a regular Mori. Nope, you get to 5 tokens, you down somebody in one shot, and you kill them. The way this works is it does not count as far as downing somebody if you're not using your basic attack. So you can even hide the fact that you have this many tokens up and that your Devour Hope is active if you're playing a killer with some sort of special attack that can injure and down people. So have a piggy up here. So let's say I'm playing pig. Devour gets to 3 stacks. The survivors don't know it. I come across an injured survivor. If I down them with my ambush dash, then this will not let them know that I have Devour Hope. But at the same time, of course, if I was to come across somebody who wasn't injured and I hit them with my dash attack, it would not down them in one shot. Any special attack is not going to do that. So a Huntress's Hatchet won't. Pyramid Head's ranged attack won't. Demigorgon's Shred, and so forth and so on. But this is a very, very powerful perk. This can literally turn a game around on a dime. If you have this up and you have this active, you can be in some trouble. They can have a lot of generators done. You get 3 hooks. They get 3 rescues. You get away from the hook. And then all of a sudden, everyone's one shot. And at that point, survivors will be in a desperate rush to get rid of your totem. If they can't, well, then pretty much everyone's going to die. The biggest advantage, once again, survivors won't know about it. The only time they get notified is when somebody gets downed with a basic attack while Devour Hope is at 3 tokens. That's when they'll get the exposed status effect and the hex that shows that they're being cursed by Devour Hope. And then it's a rush, basically, for them to get the totem down before you, as the killer, can get everybody on a hook or dead. My success comes when survivors don't care about looking for totems. A lot of times I'll play Devour Hope on a build that does not rely on Ruin, and if Devour Hope is the only totem up, a lot of times survivors will completely ignore totems. If they don't see that Ruin is up, they'll just go from generator to generator and try to get things done as quickly as possible. And by the time they start looking for Devour Hope, well, if you can protect it, particularly if you're on a killer that has some mobility to protect it, then that may be game over. Or if the totem is just in a very difficult to find spot. Or if you run it with, let's say, Hex Undying, which we'll get to. So Devour Hope is one of those few perks in the game that can literally turn a game around from where you're getting beaten to where you have the upper hand and are ready to put it away. And on that case, the only negative about Devour Hope, the only one, is that it can be cleansed. But even so, I mean, I'm tempted to give it a 5 out of 5, but we will give it a 4 out of 5 because, again, if survivors are on their game and looking for totems, you can lose it before it ever gets to 3 stacks. Or if the totem spawns in the wide open, even if you get it to 3 stacks, it could be cleansed before you get very much usage out of it. But even that being said, Devour Hope, one of the best perks in the game from a Hex standpoint, and definitely one worth running on almost any killer. Now we'll move to Hex Haunted Ground. This will be a spirit perk. Haunted Ground shows that 2 Hex totems start off in the trial lit up. When either one of these is cleansed by a survivor, all survivors in the trial will suffer from the exposed status effect for 60 seconds. I'm going to give this one 3 out of 5 as far as its effectiveness. Again, it's one of the better Hex perks in the game, and it's often run with other Hex perks that have negative effects on survivors. Let's say you run it with Ruin. Survivors are going to be looking for the totem. They think they found Ruin. Instead, they find Haunted Ground, and all of a sudden, everyone in the game is exposed for 60 seconds. That's the good. It gives you the opportunity, particularly if you're in a chase with somebody who's at full health when Haunted Ground goes off, or if you are around a bunch of survivors when Haunted Ground goes off that are all full health, it will give you a chance to get multiple downs and get a chance to snowball and get one hook or multiple hooks. And for that aspect, it's a very good solid perk for what it does. The downside to Haunted Ground, there are times that Haunted Ground will go off and you will not be around a survivor. And you may not be able to find a survivor because survivors at that point will go very stealthy to avoid getting downed and just wait that 60 seconds out. So it really helps to already have an eye on somebody when Haunted Ground goes off. There are also instances you can be chasing a survivor and that survivor's already injured when Haunted Ground goes off, and you downing them in one shot, well, you would have done that anyway, even if Haunted Ground hadn't gone off. Haunted Ground is one of those perks that also, if survivors don't feel like there's any reason to look for a perk that's a Hex totem, a survivor may come across it, realize, hey, there's no Ruin in this match, there's nothing detrimental to us in this match that we can tell. That may be Haunted Ground. I might not want to touch that. If that happens, then again, you're not going to really get any value out of Haunted Ground. And of course, once it's gone, it's gone. It gives you that 160-second burst. Once that's done, that's it. Your perk slot is dead for the rest of the match, and you're down a perk slot. So you basically, if you're playing it and it goes off, you need to get value out of it. You need to get people down, and you need to get people down quickly, and at least one to get some value out of the perk. For these reasons, again, this is one of the only perks, or literally the only Hex perk, that you absolutely want to see get cleansed and would love to spawn out in the wide open. If that's the case, good for you. It's a good perk for what it does. I can't rate it any higher because it does have enough situations where you might not get any value out of it, but for what it does, I would say a solid, strong 3 out of 5, and definitely worth running, particularly if you're running a killer with high mobility that can kind of take advantage of it. And, you know, if you paired this up, let's say, with a killer that's running Infectious Fright, Haunted goes off, you down somebody, Infectious goes off, and all of a sudden you can snowball with a high mobility killer. Definitely a perk worth running in a lot of builds. Again, I'll give it a 3 out of 5 stars for its rating. Now we'll move on to kind of a meme perk a little bit. Hex Huntress's Lullaby. This is a Huntress perk, obviously. The way this works, whenever you hook somebody, you will get a token as long as the Hex is up and still in play. From 1 to 4 tokens, the time between skill check warnings, wherever you get the skill check warning sound for the survivor, will become shorter and shorter, eventually culminating at 5 tokens where survivors will get no skill check warning before a skill check pops up on their screen. In addition, whenever survivors miss a skill check, they'll have a 6% regression penalty whenever they miss that skill check, either whether healing or repairing. So, Lullaby recently got buffed a little bit. Originally, Huntress's Lullaby would show up the minute you got a skill check, even if no one had been hooked, and that would signal survivors to go ahead and start looking for the totem. Now, the way Huntress's Lullaby works is you actually have to have a token on it and somebody hooked, and then you get a skill check as a survivor, and then you'll get the Hex notification that Huntress's Lullaby is in play. So it does give you a little bit of time for you as the killer to get a little bit of value out of it before survivors start looking for it and breaking it. I still, however, would only give this one a 2 out of 5 as far as the ranking goes. It's not the worst Hex perk, but again, it's very situational, and oftentimes you can get no value out of it. If it spawns in a bad location, it could be cleansed before you get any tokens. Once survivors know it's in play, again, they're going to be looking for it, and again, that will also come down to RNG as to where your totem spawns. And again, we've heard this a lot, and we'll keep hearing that. And again, really, really good survivors don't nearly have the trouble with skill checks. This is a perk that definitely causes problems the worse ranked your survivors are. Once you start getting up into purple and red ranks, survivors can deal with the lack of preparation as far as the notification before they get a skill check. They can deal with it much better than they can at let's say green ranks or yellow ranks, or certainly at brown ranks. If you're playing at those ranks, the lack of a warning for skill checks are much better. But even at 5 tokens and no warning, survivors can a lot of times power through it and avoid missing those skill checks. And sometimes, you know, getting a skill check is random just to begin with. You can sit on a generator sometimes and go a long time without seeing a skill check, or doing a heal, go through an entire heal without seeing a skill check, in which case Lullaby isn't helping you. It's very good, I think, not just against certain levels of survivors, but the one killer that I think gets the most usage out of it is the Doctor. If you run an impossible skill check Doctor round, and you're playing that type of build where you just want to make skill checks nearly impossible to hit, a Lullaby is much more devastating, mainly because survivors are going to be much better at hitting skill checks without a warning if that skill check is normal and in the middle of the screen. But when the Doctor starts shifting that skill check all around the screen and starts making it go in reverse, well, it's games and instances like that that can cause lots of problems. So if you're running a build with the Doctor and you want to use Lullaby, I think the Doctor is the killer it works by far and away the best with. Other killers, it can, but again, really good survivors will be able to probably get to the totem before it causes too much trouble, and should be able to get through their skill checks without too much trouble. It's an annoying perk, but again, I wouldn't say anything that you would want to run on a regular basis. It's going to be hard to get legitimate value out of it that can really turn the match. There are better perks than it. And again, I would call this one probably like a 2 out of 5 as far as the ranking goes. We'll move on to everyone's infamous favorite, Hex, No One Escapes Death, or NOED as it is called. This is a common perk, or it's very rare, but it's common in that it's found in everybody's blood web, so it's not specific to one killer. It's one of the very few Hex totems that falls under that classification. And the way NOED works is that once the exit gates are powered, if there is any dull totem left on the map, this Hex gets applied to one of those dull totems. While it's active, your movement speed is increased by 4% at tier 3, and survivors suffer from the exposed status effect, meaning they're one shot down, and this will stay up as long as the totem is standing. So again, NOED is one of the most hated perks out of all the Hex perks. And when it comes to survivors, if you ask people, it's the one that they think should be changed, should be altered. Other people would love to see it just removed from the game entirely. It can be very frustrating to go against. And usually the response by people to anyone complaining about NOED is, you know, just do bones, just do totems, and this won't affect you. And they are correct. If you do all 5 totems before the end of the match, a killer with NOED will get nothing. And that will basically be a wasted perk slot entirely. The problem is that on a couple of maps, totem spawns can be difficult to find. And of course, in solo queue, totems can be hit and miss, because you may be doing totems as a solo player, but you don't know for certain if your team is, unless you're running a perk like Small Game. Well, you're not going to know how many totems have been cleansed at that point. And it's very possible you could get 3 or 4 totems cleansed as a team, and that one totem that's left is going to be the one that will still get NOED and still put your team at risk. I would give this one a strong 3 out of 5. I feel like giving it a little bit more than that, but the reason I'm only give it 3 out of 5 is this. Once again, it's a totem Hex Hex Totem that only will give you value as a killer if you are already in trouble in the game anyway. All the gens have to be powered for it to even come into play. Until it does, as a killer, you're playing a perk down the entire match with only 3 perks. If you've played very well, you will kill everybody before the last generator pops. And again, you will have played with 3 perks the entire match, and you will get no value out of NOED. So that's 2 instances. The survivors cleansing all the totems, or if the survivors cleanse all the totems, obviously you get no value out of NOED, or you kill everyone before all the gens are powered and you get no value out of NOED. So right there's just 2 instances. As a killer, you will get no value out of NOED entirely and will just play a perk down. Let's say NOED does go off, then this is what usually happens. You will have survivors that if somebody gets down by NOED and gets hooked, if all the gens are done, a lot of survivors will just go ahead, power the exit gates, and get out of the match and, well, leave that person to die. Or they can cleanse NOED during that period of time, as long as no one has opened an exit gate, as long as that person on the hook has enough time to hang on to that hook. They can go ahead, they can cleanse NOED after it's gone off, and then they lose that exposed status, and then all of a sudden, you know, much easier to get a save, much easier to get everybody out. So NOED is not what, despite what people think, is not a guarantee that a killer will turn a 0K into a 4K. At most, a lot of times, it guarantees one kill, because if survivors can't find the totem, then the best they should be able to do if somebody is hooked is basically trade 1-for-1 up until the end game collapses or until somebody's dead. And that doesn't count instances where survivors just decide, heck, I'm not staying around for this, I'm bailing, and the killer just gets the one person they downed and everyone else goes out the exit gates. There's just too many instances where as a killer, you might get one more kill. It's most powerful when you only have a couple survivors left at the end of the game. Let's say you only have 2 people alive and they get the exit gate powered. Well, you know, at this point you're going to be moving faster, and if you down one, that probably secures your 3K, or you can just leave them slugged and then go looking for the 4th person who is probably frantically looking for the totem or for a door, but with only a couple people left, that's going to limit their options as far as being able to get the other person out or even getting themselves out at that point. But if all 4 people are alive at the end of the match, this really is only going to get you maybe one more kill at most. And again, there's ways to get around it and ways to combat it, even if it does go off, to limit the damage or to eliminate the damage altogether. So it's a very powerful perk, and there are entire endgame builds that you can build around having NOED, but because of some of its limitations and because of what it can actually guarantee you, especially against good survivors, we're going to give it 3 out of 5 stars. A good solid perk, but again, not necessarily the game changer that people make it out to be. Now, we do have a game changer perk, is the Hag perk, Hex Ruin. Hex Ruin was changed a little more than a year and a half ago, and to its current status, where the way it works now, whenever a generator is not being repaired by a survivor, if it has progress, it will immediately start to regress automatically at 200% of the normal regression speed. This is a very, very powerful perk. It is the most powerful of all regression perks when it stays up. That's the disclaimer. And it's by far the most powerful of the Hex perks, I believe, and I give it 5 out of 5 stars. If you're playing killer, it is almost imperative that you have a slowdown perk of some type, and Hex Ruin is arguably the best one you can do, only limited by the fact that survivors can break it, which unfortunately, as has been a common theme, can be a very common occurrence. Ruin is great because if you are pressuring survivors by pushing them off of generators, any work that somebody does onto a generator will eventually start going away and going away until that generator goes back to nothing and survivors will have to start all over again. As someone who plays a lot of Hex Ruin, I can say that there are many matches that I can say Ruin staying up is what is winning me the game. If survivors can't look for Ruin because you're pressuring them too much and getting them on hooks and forcing them to have to do rescues, and they really don't have a time to do a dedicated search for it, then it can be devastating to a survivor team. if the Ruin Totem actually spawns in a good location, that's going to be difficult for survivors to find. They can waste a lot of time looking for it, which can be very devastating to their team. If it spawns in one of these impossible locations, well, that can be game winning for you, because if the survivors can't find it, eventually, if you can continue to pressure generators hard enough and pressure survivors off of them, and pressure them by getting survivors onto hooks, forcing other survivors to get off of gens to do rescues or to do heals, that's going to allow those gens to regress, and that can literally just tilt the game into your fashion in no matter what killer you play. It is easily the best of the Hex Totem perks, and despite the problem of it being found or located, it is still one that I would say is runnable on almost any killer, that you will get at least a little value out of it. I guess worst case scenario, the survivor spawns in front of it. It takes 14 seconds for them to break it. Well, that was 14 seconds. They weren't on the gen they spawned right in front of. But even if you get 1 minute or 2 minutes or 4 minutes out of value out of Ruin before they break it, it's still time that generators that are not being worked on are going to regress. Again, if you can keep pushing people off of those gens, getting people onto hooks, forcing people to get off of generators to get rescues, that's going to cause those gens to regress. It can be, again, just completely game-changing, and it is by far and away the best Hex perk to run. Whether or not there are issues with locations of it or not, it's still well worth running in pretty much any match that you need slowdown in. So now we'll move to the last of the Hag's teachables, Hex the Third Seal. It's the worst of her 3 perks. It's not a horrible perk, but it's very situational. And I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5 star rating. And it has one major weakness, and one that you can't do anything about as a killer. But we'll talk about what it does do here. Whenever you hit a survivor with a basic attack while the totem is up, it's going to apply the blindness status effect to that survivor. This will apply to the last 4 survivors hit. So you hit 4 different survivors with your basic attack, and all 4 of them will be blind. What does that mean? Well, if they're blind, you hook somebody, they're not going to be able to see that person on the hook. They'll be able to see the bubble when you hook them, but they're not going to actually see that person on the hook on the map. You down somebody, you slug them, you leave them on the ground. Again, they're blind. They're not going to be able to see their teammates if they're blind, to be able to know where their teammates are, to crawl to them or try to get closer to them. If their teammates are blind, they're not going to see that person on the ground either. This can be very devastating on killers who slug in particular. If you play someone like the Twins, if you play someone like Oni, you know, these are killers that definitely can slug. Nurse could do this. These are killers that can definitely take advantage of this. And again, blindness is one of those effects that normally doesn't cause problems, but it can in this instance, and it could be a really good perk. Its major weakness, other than location, is going to be the fact that, well, most people do not play solo survivor. More people than not are going to be playing with a friend or as part of a larger survive with friend groups, and survive with friends absolutely destroys Third Seal. If you're playing, let's say, as a 4-man Swift, and you have Third Seal, and that 4-man Swift gets somebody who gets blinded and is down on the ground, or someone who's hooked, and you have people that are blind on the team, it's not going to really matter as much if the team can coordinate where they are through voice comms. So, you know, if I'm down and I'm down by the bus on the auto map, and I can just call out to my teammate and say, hey, I'm on the hook, you know, behind the bus on the map, and all of a sudden my teammates know where I'm at, whether or not they're blind or not. I'm giving them directions and basically overriding what Third Seal does, and that's Third Seal's biggest weakness. If Third Seal did not have to deal with Survive with Friends, it could be a much more powerful perk. Blindness just in general could be much more powerful, but voice comms and Survive with Friend groups are Third Seal's biggest weakness, other than the totem spawn. And in that case, it makes it, again, it was situational, because you really do need to run a build that kind of focuses on utilizing that blindness effect to its fullest. But just the fact it can be defeated by that is something that, in my opinion, has to lower its ranking down to making it very situational. Again, 2 out of 5 stars for me on this perk. Now we'll move to the only other perk that is not killer specific other than NOAD. That's Hex Thrill of the Hunt. And for this one, Thrill of the Hunt will give you a little totem counter on your Hex, so you'll be able to see how many totems are left on the map. They'll start off with 5 and go down as somebody works on a totem. It gives you a little bit of extra more blood points for each token. That's not why anybody would run it. The reason people run it are the following. Survivor's cleansing speed is reduced by 6% for each token. So if you have 5 totems up, that cleansing speed is going to be reduced by 30%. That's not huge when it only takes 14 seconds to cleanse a totem normally, but sometimes every little bit does help as far as protecting your totems. More importantly, you'll gain a notification whenever someone starts working on a Hex totem. So if you're playing Ruin or Devour Hope or Lullaby or even Third Seal and you want to protect that totem, and you run Thrill of the Hunt, somebody starts working on either Thrill or that Hex totem, you will get a notification, and that will give you a chance to protect that totem. I would rank Thrill of the Hunt a solid 3 out of 5 on the rankings, the ratings. It's a solid perk. It is good because, again, it is good for totem defense, both for the reduction of speed and for the notification you get when someone's working on the Hex totem. Thrill of the Hunt can definitely help you protect the totem, but you do need to some extent be a killer that can either protect the totem through their mobility, whether it's someone like a Wraith who can move across the map quickly, or a Hillbilly who could do the same, or an Oni, or a Blight, or potentially it could be someone like the Hag herself could run this, because you could always teleport to a trap if somebody's working on a totem and sets off a trap near it. Again, Freddy could use this if you have a generator next to a totem and you hear somebody's working on the totem, you could always teleport to the gen and defend it. For those reasons, it's a good perk, but by itself, it can't be ranked any higher than that, because by itself, it doesn't really do anything. It only really works if you pair it up with another totem. I mean, you could run it, and whenever someone starts working on a Hex totem, that's going to let them know. And I do believe you do get the notification, if you're a survivor, that you have Thrill of the Hunt no matter what you're working on, because that cleansing speed will be slower. So even if you're working on a dull totem, you'll know that the killer has Thrill of the Hunt. And you may think the killer has another totem they're trying to protect somewheres. You might waste some time looking for another totem that doesn't exist if they're just running Thrill. But the other problem is that if you are running Thrill, if you're not running a high mobility killer, like let's say I'm running Pig, and Thrill lets me know as I'm chasing somebody that someone's working on a Hex totem and it's across the map, I'm not going to get there in time, even if I abandon my chase to run to that totem. So that only gives so much protection. And again, it works really good with some killers, not so good with others. And because of that, I would give it still a strong 3 out of 5 rating, but no more than that, because again, it's not something that can swing the game around. It can protect the totem that you want to keep up, but even then, that's not going to be a guarantee, depending where you are when you get a notification that someone's working on a totem. All right, so now we're going to move to our last Hex perk here. We have Hex Undying, and we actually have one more Hex perk that we've skipped over, and we're going to have to go to another killer for it, because we don't have it unlocked on Piggy, because we don't run it. Hex Undying is a Blight perk. The way Hex Undying works, any survivor within 4 meters of a dull totem is going to have their aura revealed. That's the secondary effect. Whenever a Hex totem is cleansed, that totem's Hex will transfer to your Undying totem, which will deactivate Undying, and any tokens that Hex has will be transferred as well. This is a change. When Undying was first released, it was very powerful. It would have been a 5 out of 5 perk. The way Undying worked originally is that it basically transferred totems until there were no more totems left, as long as it was the Hex totem that was being broken and not Undying. Now the way it works is, no matter what Hex totem is cleansed first, if you're running Undying and another Hex, the first one cleansed will always be Undying. It either will be Undying because it was to begin with, or whatever Hex gets cleansed first will then transfer to Undying, and then that's going to be the end of the perk. I'm still going to give this a solid 4 out of 5. It's not the 5 out of 5 it used to be, but it is a 4 out of 5. Originally, it also would give you aura readings on survivors that were on any totem. Now it's just dull totems. It would be more powerful if it gave you aura readings on somebody who was working on a lit totem, but then it would be thrill of the hunt in some aspects. So I do see why the change was made to this. The original Undying, I think, was a little bit too strong. The current Undying can still be very RNG based, and it's not a 5 out of 5 anymore because, you know, essentially survivors spawn right in front of your 2 lit totems, and that happens more often than you would want. What'll happen is, well, the first totem will get cleansed, then the second one, and then all of a sudden Undying has lasted maybe 30 seconds in the match, and you still have no totem to defend. That being said, if you are in a match and you are running a totem you want to protect like Ruin, if you run Undying with it, the first totem they find is always going to be then Undying. That means your Ruin will stay up longer. That means you will get more value out of it. And there is always a chance that second totem location is difficult to find, and you really get a lot of value out of the perk. I've had many matches where I've run Ruin and Undying, and survivors will go to the Hex perk and cleanse it, thinking it's Ruin, and instead it'll be Undying, and then they'll go back to generators. I'll chase them off of generators, and then they run, and you can almost see the look in their face that says, wait a minute, I thought I got rid of Ruin already, and in reality they didn't. What happened was they got rid of Undying, and now they still have to deal with looking for another totem. Undying pairs up really well with other perks, like a perk like Devouring Hope. It can also pair up very well with a perk like that, because now the totems will transfer. So if you're running Devour, you get it up to 3 stacks. Survivors then start looking for the totem. They find your totem, they break it, and then it transfers over to the other Undying totem, and it carries all of those stacks with it, and survivors are then really in a deep hole. So, you know, if you can run it with a perk like Devour and get Devour up to 3 stacks, and they haven't broken either totem at that point, then it almost is a GG, unless you're very unlucky, because at that point, you're just going to get people down and dead before they ever find that second totem. To a lesser extent, it can work with something like Huntress's Lullaby, though again, Lullaby's value can be varied, and again is a little bit more niche, but it does work with that. It's a strong perk, not nearly as strong as it used to be, but it's really kind of your only gen defense, your only hex defense other than Thrill of the Hunt is going to be Undying, and I prefer Undying to Thrill simply because I don't need to be in the vicinity to protect my totem. If I have Undying, if Thrill, I'm going to kind of need to be there to protect whatever totem they're cleansing. With Undying, you know what, if they break it, that's fine. I'm just going to hope they don't get to the second one in time. Just for its ability to protect Ruin, I think alone, I would give it 4 out of 5 stars, and definitely a perk worth running. So, what perks that are Hex perks do we not have unlocked? We said there were perks that we did not have unlocked. As you can see, all of our killers, save for 2 of them, are at level 40 and have all their perks unlocked. Trickster's Hex perk is the one that we did not look at was the Death Slinger, and we're going to take a look at his perk here. That would be Hex Retribution. That is unlockable at level 40 from the Death Slinger. The way Retribution works is that anyone who cleanses a dull totem suffers from the Oblivious status for 35 seconds, and if any Hex totem is cleansed, including this one, the auras of all survivors are revealed for 10 seconds. So this is a perk that is one of the few perks that if survivors break it, they get negative repercussions from breaking it. The Oblivious status effect is nice. More importantly, I think, is the all auras are revealed for 10 seconds aspect of it. Again, it's very useful on high mobility killers. If you play someone like Nurse, let's say, and you can traverse the map quickly with your blinks, somebody breaks Retribution, you know where all 4 survivors are at, and then all of a sudden you can start downing people quickly and really snowball the game immensely. If you run it in combination with another Hex perk, again, let's say you run it with Undying, well, then you'll basically get 2 chances of finding out where all the survivors are at. If they break it once, that will essentially transfer Retribution to Undying, but you'll still get the aura readings. And if they break it again, you will get it a second time. The problem is that sometimes, again, knowing where everyone's at for 10 seconds may not be something that helps you depending on what killer you're playing. Some killers may not have the mobility to take advantage of it. You may not have the position on the map to take advantage of it. There's a possibility somebody breaks the totem. You see everyone for 10 seconds, and all of a sudden, 10 seconds later, you haven't caught up with anybody because you weren't really close to anybody. Their aura reading is gone, and that was the end of your perk. So Retribution is very, again, I think niche and situational. I'm going to give it 2 out of 5 stars. Again, certain killers can really take advantage of it. And the one, like I said, I've seen the most usage out of that's been very devastating to survivor groups is when it's run on a nurse. And I've seen it run in combo with Undying and with other Hex perks that cause problems, like Haunted Ground, for instance. If you run, let's say, Haunted Ground and Retribution, that's a nice combo. If someone cleanses Haunted Ground, then what will happen is Retribution will show you the auras of all the survivors for 10 seconds. You'll know where everyone is at. Now, again, you'd have to run those two in combination with a killer that can take advantage of it. And again, we're saying someone like Nurse is a perfect killer to use it with, but not every killer will be able to do that. So just because of its niche, I wavered on giving it a 3 out of 5, but we're going to give it a 2 out of 5. It does have some usages in certain spots, but not as many as we'd like it to be in order for us to run it on a regular basis. All right, so that is all of your Hex perks and all of my ratings for them. So one thing you heard me mention throughout this was whether or not the totems get found and the RNG aspect. And that, I think, is the biggest problem. As we heard, a lot of those Hex totems, there are plenty that just really don't do very much at all and are very situational and are very niche. And for that reason, those are totems that, honestly, a couple of them could not even be totems and just be regular old perks and probably still wouldn't have a great impact on the match. Such as, we were looking back, such as the Blights perk, such as Blood Favor. Again, how much value you can get out of this. You probably don't even need this to be a Hex perk. Again, Crowd Control's another one that's kind of limited. Some of those perks like that just are not very strong to begin with. The very powerful perks like Ruin and Devour and even Haunted Ground, those are different. But in cases of Ruin, for instance, how many times have you watched one of my matches and you've heard me say, well, there goes my Ruin, there goes my Undying, and we're literally a minute into the match or less. Totem spawns are definitely a problem, and the developers have not yet, for whatever reason, been able to figure out the difference between ridiculously hard to find and so easy to find that a person picking up the game for the first time could find it and cleanse it in less than 30 seconds. We literally have had matches where we've had survivors spawn right on top of our totems, and the totem has been gone in the first 20 seconds of the match. Literally the load-in time, the time it took for the survivor to walk or run to the totem and then cleanse it. And they're not even defensible in those cases. It really doesn't matter what killer you're playing. You're probably not going to be able to defend your totems. And I've seen people say, well, you just have to defend your totems. That's impossible to do. And if you spend all match defending your totems, well, you're just going to lose the game anyway. Totem spawns like that, and we've had examples of them spawning on top of hills in the wide open, right in front of trees in the wide open, literally 2 feet away from a generator, 2 feet away from a jigsaw box. It's just, some of the totem spawns are just terrible, and I'd like to say that it's a product of old maps, but it's not. Even some of the reworked maps, the Auto Haven maps, are just tend to have terrible totem spawn locations. The corn maps are a little bit better than they used to be, but not particularly all that much better. The spawns where you see them in the Killer Shack are just, I mean, those are just gimme, easy, ridiculously stupid, easy to find totem spawns that just should not be a thing. Everyone knows to check the Killer Shack to see if a totem's in it. And there are occasions that it's not there, but there's nothing more depressing than to see your Hex Totem spawning in the Killer Shack where you know survivors are going to be at some point during the course of the match, and that totem will just never last. Why the developers cannot find a happy medium between hard to find, ridiculously hard to find, and ridiculously easy just baffles me. I don't understand that. You would think in the reworks of the maps they could find ways to conceal them slightly better, to where survivors can find them without ridiculous amounts of effort, but that would at least give it a chance to stay up for you to get some value out of your Hex Totem. I'm not saying that I expect Ruin to be up the entire game, every match I play. If it did, it would be arguably the most powerful perk in the game by far, but I am saying it'd be nice to not have so many matches end with the totem being gone so quickly. And people will say, well, Hex Totems are risk-reward. It's high reward, but you have to have high risk. The problem is most of the hexes that we talked about don't really have a very high reward. Again, so many of them are situational. So many of them have limited use. Only a couple of them really have that high reward. But the problem is it's not really high risk, high reward when there is little risk, because the totem spawns in such a wide open location that the only way survivors aren't breaking it is if they're purposely ignoring it. Not to mention the fact that we now have multiple Hex Perks, Hex Perks for survivors. Detective's Hunch, which allows you to see Hex locations almost map-wide whenever a generator is completed. Small Game, which gives you a very narrow focus on totems with a noise notification, as well as a totem count to let you know how many totems are left on the map or how many have been cleansed. And the new Jill perk, Counterforce, which every time you cleanse a totem, the next totem you cleanse, you'll cleanse even faster. You'll get the location shown to you of the totem the furthest away from you on the map during the match. And I've seen players, literally myself, I've even done this, playing with that perk, have cleansed all 5 totems in not really a particularly long period of time. With all of those hex finding perks that are already in the game, it would make sense to have totem spawns be at least more difficult. And I'm not saying they're not. There are some maps that they are. Midwich has usually some very difficult totem spawns to find. That is probably maybe the toughest map in the game currently to find them. If it's not Midwich, Larry's has very difficult totem spawns to find, and Hawkins can have some very difficult totem spawns as well. Those 3 maps are probably the most difficult. I haven't played Raccoon City enough to say whether or not that's going to be up there, but just from early indications, Raccoon City may be harder than all 3 of those. So the indoor maps, those 4 are probably your best, along with Glenvale. And Glenvale probably, I think, is one of the more balanced ones. Whenever I play Glenvale as a survivor, I do kind of know the locations in general where totems tend to spawn, and I usually can find totems on that map as a survivor, even without totem finding perks, most of the time, usually. And if I have teammates that are looking, usually that's one that if we're able to look, if we have the time to look, if the killer gives us the time to look, then we should be able to find the totems on that map. But it takes a little bit of looking. We will kind of know the location of where a totem will spawn, let's say by the saloon, and there's odd and end different places it can spawn. It can spawn in some of the different rooms. It can spawn in the wheelbarrow behind it. You know, there's more than one location it can spawn, and sometimes it takes a little bit of time to actually find it. Even though you kind of know the general location of where to look, sometimes it can be a little bit more difficult, but it's not impossible. So, you know, Glenvale is, I think, maybe the most balanced map for totem locations, and that there's nothing terrible, but there's nothing completely impossible to find. So if the developers could, I don't know, maybe do something closer to Glenvale on the maps, then I think Hex Totems as a whole would be more viable to run. You really don't see much run beyond Ruin, Undying, Devour, Noed. Those are really your 4 perks that I think you tend to see as, you know, and Haunted Ground. I mean, those are the ones you tend to see. But Haunted, ironically, that's the perk you want them to find. You want them to break the totem. You want that perk to be in the wide open. But the other ones, other than the ones I mentioned, the other ones really don't see a lot of usage, mainly because they're just not good enough And with spawn locations, what they are currently in the game, they're just not worth running. And that's a shame, because totems are kind of a secondary objective. You really want to see survivors doing them as a killer, because that's time they're not on generators. And if totems were more important to the survivors in a game, well, then that would lengthen games, that would eliminate some of the games where generators get done so quickly, and I think it would help. I don't know if it would help eliminate the play style that you see of some killers, literally trying to tunnel people out the minute they get somebody on hook to try to turn it into a 3v1 to try to slow the game down. Would that change that behavior? I don't know. It's hard to say. I think it's so ingrained in the way some people play killer these days, and I don't know if that would change it. But totems as a secondary objective were put in the game originally with the idea that survivors would do them, but with the current meta, unless you know you're going up against a Hex perk that's going to cause you problems like Ruin, you don't even need to worry about cleansing totems. And honestly, even with Ruin up, you can still power through Ruin. It's happened to me as a killer where a team has done that, and I've been part of a team as a survivor where we've just powered through the gens with Ruin up, and it didn't matter because the killer can't pressure, 3 or 4 generators at once. He can only pressure one, and pressure one survivor at a time. Killer chases one survivor. You have other survivors working on gens. Even with Ruin, those gens are going to get done. So I'd like to see something reworked, but I just don't sense that's going to happen. The developers, again, have released new maps like Midwich, where the totem spawns are almost just too difficult and almost overpowered if you end up on a map like that. Whenever I play killer and I want my totems to stay up, I'll send myself to Larry's or Hawkins or Midwich because of those reasons. Or you have games, again, where the totems are just so in the wide open that your perks are wasted if you're running them. And there should be something in the middle. And I'd like to think the developers could do that, but when you see them rework, like I said, something like the auto maps and the totem spawns are just as bad as they were before, then that doesn't really give me much hope that the developers will do that. But we can always hope for something better. And there is something called the Boon Totem, I believe it is, that survivors will interact with for benefits for them. The developers have been kind of tight-lipped on that. They've just said that that is something new that's coming. Will it be something like the early game collapse that was supposed to slow down the early game that the developers apparently abandoned and never did? Will it go along the lines of that, or will it actually be a mechanic that makes totems a little bit more important, or makes totem spawns a little bit more in the spotlight as far as whether or not they're too good or not good enough? Only time will tell for that. But this has been my take and look at the Hex totems and the Hex perks, my rankings on them. Feel free to comment below on what you think the best Hex totem or Hex perk is, what you think about Hex spawns, totem spawns, and whether or not they're too good, whether or not they're not good enough, if they're just right. I would love to hear your comments below. Please consider hitting the like and subscribe button while you're here. We have new videos on the channel on a daily basis, and you can follow us over on Twitch at Geriatric Gaming 11 and get notified whenever we go live. I hope you enjoyed my look at the Hex perks and where I rank them. And until the next time, thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next Dead by Daylight.